Yeah, is it? Yes, yes. Okay, good morning in Delhi. Yeah, it's a bit cold in Delhi, but I hope you're warm enough. Most of you probably used to it now.
So a very good morning to all of you. I welcome you to speaker after our winter break, and I'm very happy. We are very fortunate to have with us Venerable Namdak to do the first teaching after our winter break.
Okay.
I requested Venerable last year, I think, in the winter break,
Okay, yeah.
to come and teach here.
Yeah.
And he said he'll think about it.
Yeah, so it took a year.
He's
Yeah.
here with us. So thank you very much,
Yeah,
Venerable,
yeah,
for accepting our invitation. Now, just a brief introduction. Venerable Tenzin Namdak was an environmental researcher, having graduated in hydrology in Netherlands. Before he took the bhikshu ordination from His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 1996. In 1997, he started his formal studies in Buddhist philosophy, psychology, phenomenology, and epistemology at Sera Jey Monastic University, Balakope, South India, and has already received his Geshe degree, that is equivalent to the PhD degree. He has also completed his traditional one-year Vajrayana study program at Gyume Tantric College in January 2019, the first Westerner to do so. So, congratulations. He taught at the Bangalore Center Chokor Somling and was a founder teacher of Sera Jey Monastic Translation Training Program as well. He was also the director of Chedrup Sumbrel Ling, a house for Western monks studying the extensive Buddhist philosophy program at Sera Jey Monastic University. Currently, he is the resident teacher at Jamyang Centre, London, and teaches worldwide. Today, he's going to give us a teaching on mind and reality and understanding of our perceptions. So, we are all ready to be enlightened by you.
All right.
Thank you.
That would make the job perfect if that happens. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, welcome for this morning talk about mind perception and how to eliminate the causes for suffering, so to say. So before we start, maybe important to generate correct motivation, as that's very important in any form of spiritual practice in general, and in particular for the Buddhist kind of teachings. So try to generate correct motivation, things that we hear together in order to learn more about the mind, in order to transform the mind, and then all the way up to to liberation and enlightenment, to the stages of parts of the Lambrim. And why? In order to help others to achieve the same, to eliminate the suffering of all mother sentient beings. So try to generate that kind of motivation for yourself. You can hear okay in the back? Bit up?
Can you turn it on, please?
It's on, I think. Yeah. I'd like a rapper. Yeah. Ooh, it's very close. Yeah, I can also do what is this one? Yeah, I forgot it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, try to generate correct motivation before we start. I think that we're here together to train the mind all the way up of the stages of path to enlightenment, in order to eliminate the suffering of mother sentient beings. Yeah, so generate kind of motivation for yourself. Then for those who are Buddhist, they can take refuge, right? Sangye Chidon Soni Sonam La Janjo Bado Dani Gyasu Ji Dagi Jushe Gibe Son Nola Penche Sangye Amba Sho Sangye Chidon Soni Son Bado Dani Gyasu Ji Dagi Jushe Gibe Son La Penche Sangye Droba Sho Sangye Chidon Soni Son Ganjo Bado Dani Gyasu Ji Dagi Jushe Gibe Son Dola Benji Sangye Doba Shu. Yeah, so maybe start with a quotation, as that is a kind of a tradition to start with. So maybe a quotation from the great Seventh Dalai Lama, where it reads that Gaza Janju Chogi Ranjichen Semji Kula Kyabani Dema Toba Koro Kyambanam Deledun Semgitos, that translates freely as Janju Chogi Ranjichens, that all the, we should say, the supreme enlightenment, yeah, Janju, the supreme enlightenment, or possessing the nature of supreme enlightenment, that's a better translation. Possessing the nature of supreme enlightenment, that's the first line. Semjikuna Kyabane abides in the continuity of all sentient beings. Yeah, so that supreme, what did I say? Supreme nature of enlightenment, Janju Choki Ranjichens, or having the supreme nature. Is okay? I have to be closer even more. I can do it. I can do it also like this. Talk like that. Yeah. Yeah, they do. It's very popular these days. But yeah.
Whisper the thing.
Yeah, and then make this sound. No, joking. So yeah, go back to the quote. Janju Chogi Ranjichen. So having or possessing the nature of supreme enlightenment. Yeah, that's maybe a better translation. Possessing the nature of supreme enlightenment. That's the first line. Semjikuna Kyabane, that abides in the continuity of all sentient beings. Yeah, so that's kind of talking about Buddha potential, right? That all beings have this particular supreme nature of enlightenment. Yeah, Semjikuna Kyabane, yeah, abides in continuity of all sentient beings. Not having realized that, that's why they wandering around in samsara. Yeah, so not having realized this nature, that's why beings are wandering around in samsara. You know, and for that purpose, I generate the body-mind. Yeah, so it's a very profound way of generating bodhicitta. And why is that so? Because you generated bodhicitta for the purpose of understanding the cause of suffering of sentient beings, and also knowing what to do about it. Yeah, so that you can, you see why beings are suffering, and you know the way out of suffering. You know, so that's kind of a very sophisticated way of generating this supreme intention of love and kindness, compassion, and particular then this bodhicitta. You know, so that's a very profound way of generating bodhicitta or compassion, because we often generate some form of compassion, you know, when we see things happening on the news or in the physical world around us. It's much easier to, or often we generate compassion by, you know, by seeing suffering directly, right? Yeah, but was when I was in just in Bulgaria last week, and you see the little goats, they've been slaughtered for the meat, right? And you see the beggars, and you see so much suffering, you know, just on the street, you know? And people living in poverty, and then most people find it difficult, you know, especially Westerners, when they come, or when you come from a kind of, you know, developed country, and then it's quite challenging for people, right? So I was with two people in the rickshaw, two people from Root, two of my friends, and they're quite new to Buddhism, and then they said, do you not get overwhelmed by seeing this suffering, you know? And I said, no, look at the rickshaw driver next to us and the people in that rickshaw. I said exactly the same, you know. So that means that even people who look like they are well off, but they still are stuck in samsara, right? So that's kind of, we often generate compassion when we see suffering directly, right, or manifest form of suffering. But the compassion that we develop for the more sophisticated understanding of suffering is much more sophisticated, right? It's much more profound. By seeing that a manifest form of suffering, or physical suffering, for example, or poverty, or being sick, or you know, things we see in the news, you know, with the wars and things like that. That we see the physical aspect, the manifest aspects, but the underlying nature of this all, that has to be understood in order to generate a real genuine form of compassion, right? So to understand that genuine form of compassion, you have to understand what is the cause of suffering. Yeah, because compassion is a mind that wishes others to be free of suffering. Yeah, so you have to understand what is suffering. And then the manifest forms of suffering for us is quite easy to recognize with a sickness or whatsoever, but the underlying causes for this sickness, that has to be understood, you know, and that's very important to see that in Buddhism we talk about, you know, afflictions and karma, right, are the two causes for suffering. Yeah, so that's very important to be understood, because if you understand afflictions and karma, then you know why we are suffering and why we are bound in samsara. So in this third line of this verse, not having realized this, mean not having realized ultimate reality, that's why beings are wandering around in samsara, right? So that's very important to recognize that aspect of, there's enough chairs or not? There's a place. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's very important to get at, you know, especially with this quotation is very profound, because if you really understand the underlying cause of all this, then you understand the reality, right? Same if you look in the physical world and you want to understand the reality, it's very important to know the underlying reality of everything. Yeah. So in quantum mechanics or other forms of science, then you can see that certain scientists, they go a bit further than the manifest things we see, right? If you look at David Bohm, for example, or Carlo Rovelli, in a kind of more modern physicist, to see what is the nature of reality, or what is the things we perceive, you know, what actually is the underlying cause for all this, you know, because we see only the manifest aspects, right? We see only the people, we see buildings, we see cars and things like that, you know. But we don't really understand what is all behind this, you know. That's kind of as when we had a dialogue with Carlo Rovelli, one of world-leading scientists in the field of quantum gravity and his specialization, quantum gravity in this case, but. When we had a dialogue, talked about consciousness and matter, or consciousness in the physical world, then he said, the material world is not that solid as it appears to be. You know, it was a very, very interesting statement, right? That what we perceive is not really a reality as such. Yeah, and David Bohm, one other physicist, was also quite clear about that how we see reality there's much more going on, and that's why he goes into these kind of implicate order aspects of reality, or hidden variables of reality, right? So there's a much more underlying reality than we normally perceive. Yeah. So if you go back to that quote and the different types of suffering, then we only see the manifest sufferings, but that's not the real understanding of suffering, you know, because the underlying cause for all this, you know, is karma and afflictions. Right, so that and we know with states of anger or excessive forms of desire or very strong attachment, we know the mind gets disturbed. That's quite clear. Yeah, that and when anger comes up, that the mind gets completely disturbed. The mind becomes unclear. You make the wrong decisions, and it is destructive for yourself and for others. That's quite clear, you know. And the science behind is very clear. Yeah, so that means that these destructive emotions, they cause a kind of direct form of suffering, yeah, disturbs the mind, and you might say something wrong to another person, right, in a rage of anger, and you later regret. So that's direct kind of suffering just from a few seconds of anger. Can be a whole day or your whole week can be spoiled, right? So that you can see that anger is a direct, the destructive emotions are a direct cause for suffering, right? But the underlying aspect of that is even much more interesting, to see that the underlying aspect of getting angry is the apprehension of a self, as we say, or I and mine. Yeah, we always, when we get upset with a situation or person, we always are very protective. We say, how dare this person say this to me? I am not like this. Yeah, so there's a very strong sense of a self. Yeah, and that's very easy to see, that if you, maybe I did last time also, I don't remember, but if I ask you, if I say to you, okay, let's check things out. So I count to 3 and everybody gets angry. Okay, 1, 2, 3, there you go. Yeah, then it's quite difficult, right? But if I say, oh, look at your hair, look at your dress, look how you look today, you know, it's terrible. Then you say, how dare Namdak say this to me? I am not like this. The I comes up, the I becomes strong, and before you know it, anger is generated. That's very clear. It's very simple, you know. So the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, already said that this aspect of the apprehension or holding on to this self is basically the cause for suffering, you know. So that's the underlying aspect, yeah. If we see manifest forms of suffering on TV, or I just mentioned the example in Bodhgaya or something like that, then that's just the manifest aspect, but not the underlying cause of this all, right? So that's important to understand, be understood, you know. So the underlying cause of all this is karma and afflictions. Yeah? So as long as we have afflictions, there's no way out. As long as there's anger, as long as there are strong desire, excessive forms of attachment, there's no way out. You know, the mind is completely occupied with this kind of thought patterns, and it causes actually suffering. Yeah. So, and then that's rooted in this concept of an I and mine. Yeah, so that's kind of a few aspects to really understand suffering. And that's not only a Buddhist thing. I mean, the Buddha talked about this 2,500 years ago, but the science behind a narcissistic character is being very destructive. It's very clear. You know, the science behind a person who is much more narcissistic is very clear. That a person has a much stronger emotional life, more and more difficult emotional life. There's inclination to depression, heart diseases, high blood pressure. It's very clear. You know, the physical and mental implications of being selfish or having a kind of egoistic approach. It's very clear in the science. And the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, already said this is the root of suffering. You know, this is something that has to be eliminated. And because the topic of today is about reality and the nature of the mind, so that's important to understand that so many things appear to our mind, but it's not a reality. You know, so that the Buddha 2,500 years ago talked about already, and now the science seems to indicate the same kind of conclusions, right? In a dialogue with Carlo Rovelli, for example, when we went to the 3 types of dependent origination, as we talk about in Buddhism, how things are dependent, how things are related with each other. There are no independent entities as such. There's no independent body, there's no independent mind, there's no independent table, no independent building. Everything is in nature of dependence or relations, as Carlo Rovelli says, right? So then when we went over those 2 aspects, then Carlo Rovelli, being a very well-respected scientist in the field of quantum mechanics, he says, I can completely agree with these kind of levels of reality as being described by Arya Nagarjuna. You know, so here, we have also Arya Nagarjuna, one of the great masters of your country, right, India. And he was a very interesting philosopher. Ale, you need a chair or you want to sit on the floor? Okay. Yeah. So this great Arya Nagarjuna, you know, from ancient India, wrote already about on his commentaries on the Buddhist teaching, about these aspects of reality. and now engaging in dialogues with scientists in the fields of physics, they come to the same conclusion, you know. Even just between you and me, Carlo Rovelli, even in a private conversation, he asked me, do I have to become a Buddhist to understand emptiness? Right? Such interest he had and appreciation he had for this philosophy. That's very interesting to see. If you look at David Bohm, for example, another physicist, he engaged in also a lot of dialogues with Krishnamurti, as you probably know, right? So, and that's helped him to shape his understanding of reality. Yeah, so David Bohm also came to very similar conclusions, you know, that the cause of problems in society is based on this holding on to independent entities, right? So he even said that, you know, he has very interesting terminology. He says this self-deceptive thought or self-identity, so to say, is the cause for problems in society. He says that's why we want power, that's why we want to have security, that's why we make a distinction between us and them, and that's exactly why there's separation. That's exactly why people have conflicts, because you don't engage in dialogues anymore. You just engage in only thinking about your own kind of country or your own kind of race or your own kind of background or culture or whatsoever. And you don't think about the others being of any value. Yeah? So that's what he said. It's very clear. David Bohm, being a physicist, to come to these conclusions that this self-deceptive thought or this self-identity on a personal level, it causes problems, but also on a global level, it causes problems. Very clear. And then on another occasion, he says, but the self-identity or the self-deceptive thought, I like that term, because it's deceptive, right? It's not correct. Yeah. So he says the self-deceptive thought or the self-identity is just a show. It's not really there, but a very convincing show, and that's why people take it as an apparent reality. That's are his words, you know. So it's very interesting, kind of lining out that, you know, of course he was influenced by Krishnamurti, and as you know, Krishnamurti's view of reality was very similar to the Buddhist way of thinking, right? So that's very interesting science that you can see that the cause of all these problems is upholding or holding to a kind of reality that seems to be independent. Yeah, and that's not, things do not exist in that way. We know that. Yeah, that the building here and you know, once it's new and then becomes old and then the paint starts to fade away. I remember this was painted a few years ago, and now, you know, you can see, right, things disintegrate. So that means that, you know, buildings, they look very solid, but every split second there's disintegration. That every split second there's disintegration that doesn't appear to our mind. Things appear very solid out there. Oh, it's always been like this. That's how it appears to the mind. But that's not a reality. So this holding on to independent entities is a cause for problems. Also holding on to permanence is a cause for problems. We know that. You know, if you think you're gonna live forever, then one day that you're gonna realize that's not a reality, right? So, and when you meet that actual reality, then, you know, for some people it's a shock because they didn't expect it to happen. All people in the planet, most people on this world, of course, it's expected, the people, with the exception of people who are thinking about death and impermanence a little bit, but the majority of the people, even when they're going to die tomorrow because of a sickness or whatsoever, they still think they're not going to die, right? So it's a very strong holding on to permanence, holding on to grasping at not being able to die or not to change. And that's a reality. The sooner you're born, you know you're going to die. That's quite clear. That's the reality. And then we think, yeah, but not for the time being. But that's also completely a stupid approach, because you never know when's the time, right? There's so many people who die very young, you know. So it's kind of, the time of death is extremely uncertain, you know. So that's given, you know. So if you see that you're going to die, and basically every step you take, there was a song, every step you take, wasn't it? Every breath you take, right? But it's not about death and impermanence, I think. I forgot. Every breath you take, right? Best thing, yeah. Well, what is probably about? Huh? Everybody else in you. And then? Yeah, I forgot. There's many lyrics, but then, yeah. So every breath you take is the same thing. Every breath you take basically is another breath close to that, right? Every birthday you have, you might like to celebrate your birthday, but actually it's a celebration of being another year close to that. That's what it means, right? That's the reality. You have a cushion? Yeah? You okay? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so every breath you take, every step you take is basically getting closer to death. That's very clear. And then it's very uncertain when we die. That's so uncertain. We always think it's not going to happen to us. Even people who are going to die for sure in a few days' time, they still don't think like that because we grasp to permanence. Yeah. So if you grasp to permanence, that's very stupid because that's not a reality. And then when you meet that reality, then it's difficult. And you can see that for many generations, people getting older and seeing people close to you dying, you're going to see that more, right? That's very clear. When I with my mother in the Netherlands, he's 78 now, and then she says, you hear so many people cancer, so many people this problem, that problem, so many people dying. I said, yeah, that's the nature of the age, right? That's if you reach that age group, then you're gonna see most of your friends in the same age group. They're getting close to that. That's a reality, right? Luckily, my mother can think about it quite well, and we can joke about it, because in the early days, that was something you don't think about, right? Yeah, but yeah, that's not very clever, because it's going to happen, and when it happens, and you're not prepared, then it can be quite shocking. Right, so if it's your dearest friend or your partner or family member, then there's this loss and people can't understand it happened. And you see that even with animals, very, very clear. There's a very strong, what we call an innate grasping to permanence, right? So we had a cat, we called him One Eye Stupa Born. Nice name, isn't it? Because he had only one eye. And the first time we saw him, we were building a stupa in Sera, and there's this arch, if you know a stupa where the Buddha sits in, right? But it was all concrete, yeah. It was just in the building process. And the first time we saw the cat, he was sitting there. So we thought, okay, interesting. So we gave him food, and then he got a girlfriend, and then they got kittens, and then the mother took so much care of the kittens, cleaning them, bringing them food, and constantly, very, very taking care. And then after some time, they were a bit, like this size. And then one of the street dogs came inside the compound, and he just, that's what they do. They attack, bite, and kill, So then the mother was like so confused, sniffing, and couldn't comprehend that the kitten had died, right? So you see the same in Dharamshala. If you study the monkeys, when I do retreat, I mostly study the monkeys rather than contemplate. And there you see, when one of the little monkeys is also sometimes they kill them or dead, then the mother carries, even if it's dead, for a few days. It's very interesting to see that there's this grasping to permanence, right? So as long as you have that grasping to permanence, then you see you go against reality. Your mind is going against reality. And that's not really very beneficial, because that reality you have to face one day, right? So that's, when you contemplate that in the permanence, then we say kashin drupa, kashin choa, means you go like pleasant and joyfully. Yeah, because if you constantly think about that in impermanence, then you're prepared, right? And then there's many masters you can see in especially in the monastic system, not all of them, but they're completely prepared, and then they give away all the possessions or something like that, and then they die, Yeah, we had one monk in Gyume, he gave away his possessions, he didn't die. So he was. Yeah. But you don't, in Gyume, you cannot have any money possessions anyway. So because you only have one bed and then half of a table or something, that's the only possession. And some books, that's the only thing you possess. You know, but it's a very, very simple life. Yeah, but Kasa, yeah. So then, if you're prepared, then it's much easier to die. You know, then it's kind of quite easy to die. You know.
Everybody was laughing till the end. I was amazed, really impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rinpoche is, yeah, I mean, those high realized beings, they complete control, right? Yeah, Kushtjöda Rinpoche also in Sera, complete control. Then he knew he's going to die that night, so he went up and he was very weak, stomach cancer, very weak. So he said, okay, and go do, you know, in his condition it was a miracle that he could stand up and walk, you know, did prayers in temple. Then he said, no, you can die in full lotus position, or you can die in the lying posture because of my condition. I die in lying posture, lie down, passed away, like that. You know, so complete control. Yeah, so that's kind of the way to die, basically. But yeah, it's all going to happen to us. But if we grasp at permanence, then when that comes, it's difficult to deal with. You know, so that's kind of why these contemplations on reality helps us. Everything when the mind goes against reality is actually creating suffering. And we see that with ignorance, we see that with grasping at permanence, right? And we see that as believing the afflictions. If you believe all your destructive emotions to be right, then you create a lot of suffering. If you believe anger to be justified, or hatred to be justified, you create a lot of problems for yourself and others. That's quite clear, you know. So these destructive emotions, the more you believe in them, the more destructive they become, because they take over, right? So and you can see many people who, first of all, were very narcissistic, as we just talked about. Their emotions, destructive emotions, are much stronger. And then if your destructive emotions are stronger, you believe in them and you justify them. It's very clear. People with very excessive desire, they think that's needed. Or people with extreme forms of anger, they think this is needed. Yeah, because they believe those afflictions. But those afflictions are actually completely opposing reality. Yeah, we know that anger overestimates the faults. Yeah, when you get angry at a person or situation, you only think about the faults of that person. Yeah, if you and that's not a reality, because the person we angry at can be the best friend of somebody else, and that the other person sees our enemy as full of qualities, and we see our enemy as full of faults. But if you look at that enemy or from somebody else's friend, the person is the same at a particular moment of time, and we see faults, somebody else sees qualities. So what's the reality then? And then we believe the way we see it. We believe that to be the reality. The other person sees the qualities and believe that to be the reality. So what's then the reality? It's very subjective, right? So what appears to our minds is very, very subjective forms of reality, and that's in our mind, not out there. You know, that's very clear. For the same thing with any form of conceptual consciousness. When you think about your room back home, or you think about your friend, the image that appears to your mind, you think, that's my room, that's my friend. But it's not true. It's just a mentally generated image of the friend or of the room. Yeah, so that's very clear in our conceptual or what we call thought consciousness. When we think about something, we think, that's how it is. But that's not true. That's just how it appears in our mind. And we take it for granted to be the reality. Yeah, so then you can see that the destructive emotions are not in accordance with reality. Yeah, we say that very clearly in the Buddhist scriptures, that anger overestimates the faults and doesn't like to see the qualities. Yeah, when you're really irritated with a person or situation, even if your best friend pats you on the shoulder and says, come on, this person is not that bad after all, you say, no, not true. Yeah, you only believe your own kind of mindset or your own kind of perception. Yeah, so perception is extremely subjective. And I like the terms Anil Seth uses. in his presentations, also in his book Being You. Anil Seth also actually he's from Indian origin, but living and working in the UK in the University of Sussex, and is a very interesting neuroscientist. Very interesting person. We also had a very nice dialogue, and also we're gonna do a course together. A very interesting person. And when we talked about mind-brain duality, then we had a lot of differences, because in Buddhism we say consciousness is something else than the physical brain, and he says consciousness is just emergent property of the brain, nothing else. Yeah, so in that regard we couldn't really discuss too much, but from the point of view of subjective forms of experience, which he is one of the main scientists, I think, in his field, within the classical framework of neuroscience, to prove subjective experience of consciousness. He says the hard problem gets dissolved, as he calls it, right? The hard problem of subjective forms of consciousness, as David Charms debates a lot, right? That Anil Seth, he says it gets dissolved in his kind of research, because he can prove the subjective experience of consciousness very clearly. Yeah, so that we start to believe a reality with his interpretation of brain prediction error response. Yeah, that your brain thinks it's like this, and within a few split seconds it comes to a final conclusion and believes that to be the reality. Yeah, so you can see. And then he comes to very interesting terminology. He says whatever is an hallucination is non-perception. Yeah, whatever is a hallucination is not really a perception as such. But what is then a perception is a controlled hallucination, he says. It's a very interesting terminology, right? Yeah, and it's very clear that the things that appear to us are not always reality, but we believe it so much, like our dreams, for example, or the rubber hand experience. Yeah, when you have a rubber hand and you have your own hand and they look identical, and there's a kind of screen, yeah, and then you have two brushes and you go on the real hand on the rubber hand at the same time. So you build up a habituation pattern that a rubber hand is your hand. It's very stupid, And then you do that for a few seconds, just a few seconds. Then you build up this habituation pattern, and then all of a sudden a guy jumps in front with a hammer and goes onto the rubber hand. And the first thing you do, oh wow, people draw back their own hand. It's very clear, So you can see that what he calls controlled hallucinations is a very interesting terminology, because the way we perceive reality is not as it appears to us. Yeah, that's very clear. And with anger, we overestimate the faults. And with attachment, we overestimate the qualities, or we call it technically superimpose. We put something on top that's not there. Yeah, when you're really irritated with a situation or person, you only think so negative about that person or that situation. Yeah, and then one negativity triggers the other one, and before you know it, you're completely stuck. Yeah, so that in this kind of emotional hijack, as we say, right? Yeah, and that's also true in behavior science or psychiatry, psychology, in the field of psychiatry. Aaron Beck from the University of Pennsylvania also says that 80 to 90% of what we perceive in a rage of anger is mentally fabricated. It's not really there. Yeah, that's very true. So we create a reality in our mind, and then we believe that to be true, and then it causes problems. That's very clear. Yeah, we often that's with anger the case, quite clearly, that we only think about the negative aspects of a particular person or situation, and we don't like to think about the qualities. But every person has a quality, right? That's quite clear. If we just talked about Buddha potential, that all sentient beings have a potential to develop. Yeah, even the worst criminal can develop, and we see that in the research with different prisons. Particular prison in Norway, Holborn prison, very famous how they accomplish incredible kind of results that only 20% of the inmates who go back to ordinary life fall back to old habits. Well, I don't know in India the rates, but in the UK it's like 50 to 60%. In the US it's 70 to 80%. Yeah, because it's just a lock-up system. There's no kind of working on the mind inside the prison, right? So that's quite clear. Yeah. Yeah, I had some experience with the central, I don't know in Delhi, but the central prison in Bangalore with 4,000 inmates. I've been quite a few times in the early days doing, meditations with the inmates there. Very interesting. And then you could see that our translator, he was there for 14 years. So I asked him one day, why are you here? Why did you do? Do you like to, if you don't like to talk about it, okay. But one day we talked about it. He said, yeah, I made a mistake. He said, for 10, 15 minutes, I was not in control. Out of anger, I killed a human being. But so that's kind of a murderer, right? But he does so good work inside the prison, with yoga, with people, meditation. He talks the language of the local guys, of the street. It's a very interesting person. Yeah. So you can see that even a person who goes to the extreme of killing another human has qualities, right? Yeah, because he's so doing such a good job inside the prison. So that means that when we get angry at a person, we only see the faults. Yeah. And if the other person has a kind of strong destructive emotion at that moment, of course, then that's a fault, right? But below that, there is a kind of mind that has clarity. Yeah, there is seeds of compassion, right? There's seeds of love and kindness. Yeah, so every human being has that. That's quite clear. Yeah. So if you only think about the faults of others, that means it's not in accordance with reality. Yeah, so that's quite clear with anger. With attachment and desire, you overestimate the qualities. Yeah, that's also very clear in the stronger the desire is, actually the more suffering that comes. There's nothing wrong with enjoying things in life, but if the attachment becomes too strong, then the expectations become too strong, and then you will never find what you're looking for, right? Yeah. Or you can get no satisfaction. Yeah. Yeah. I, not you, but I can get no satisfaction, right? So that's quite clear. That is with food, it's with people. You have so many expectations or places. If I'm there, I will be so happy. If I'm with this person, I will be so happy. If I have this food, I will be so happy. And then you have that food, or you're with that person, or you're in that place, and it's kind of, so what? Right? There's no satisfaction. That's very clear. If you want to be with a particular person and you're really looking for it, and you're with that person, it's like normal, right? It's very clear. There's nothing wrong with being with people or enjoying food or going somewhere, but the stronger the attachment and desire is, the more you overestimate or superimpose the expectations and the qualities. And the stronger that aspect is, the more difficult it is to find any form of satisfaction. And that you can see. People who are very famous, very wealthy, have a lot of money, they try this, they try that. Yeah, and then they go into the drugs. And you can see, then they have one drug, they're not satisfied, so then they have another one, they make a cocktail, and then they kill themselves, right? So that's true, that's kind of people, there's no satisfaction to be found in the external world. Yeah, there's no satisfaction to be found in the objects of the senses. Yeah, that's the objects of the senses do never ever bring any satisfaction. The real satisfaction comes from what we call mental consciousness, right? We have 5 sensory perceptions, right? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the tentacle of the body. And we have mental consciousness, right? So the real happiness comes not from outside. That's quite clear. Yeah? The real happiness comes from within. Because the more external activities you engage in, the more nice food you eat, the more being with other persons or going to places, the more you do that, it's not you become happier and happier, or the more drugs you take, it's not you become happier and happier and happier. Yeah, I have a little bit experience before I became a monk of rave parties and things like that in Rotterdam. 1990 and 1991 we went to one place called Park City. It's still that club only lasts for a few years, but anyway. There was too much drugs and there was gun violence a few times, and then they had to close. But you can see that you strive for things all night long, and it's not the more you do it, the happier you become, right? That's very clear. Actually, the more you do it, the more destructive it becomes, because you're looking for more, and then you're looking for more. It's like what we say, if you're thirsty and you drink salty water, there's no end. You just keep drinking, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So that means that strong desire or attachment is the problem. There's nothing wrong with enjoying things in life. If you enjoy without desire or attachment, then actually there's much more peace of mind, right? That's very clear. So then the external objects do not bring satisfaction. That's very clear. Because the more you engage in a particular activity, you think, oh, if I do this, I will be so happy. If I do that, I will be so happy. If I have this, I will be so happy. The more you do that, you do not become happier and happier and happier. The more the desire becomes, actually you get more frustrated. And you get more, the mind becomes more unclear. And then, there's just no happiness. So the real happiness comes from within mental consciousness. And that mental consciousness that lives in accordance to reality. Yeah, that's what we see with destructive emotions. They all not in accordance to reality. And when you believe these destructive emotions, they become very destructive. So basically, destructive emotions, they're just lying to us, and we're very stupid to believe them. Because anger says this person is bad, the situation is bad because of this, because of that, because of this, that, and then you believe it all, and then you're stuck, and you think that person is really bad, and then one negative thought, creates the other one. And with desire is the opposite, but exactly the same. You have all these expectations, and you have all these qualities you see which are not there. And that's kind of. Then when you meet the object, there's no satisfaction. Why is there no satisfaction? Because you do not find what you were looking for. You look for something in your mind. You create it, a reality, which is not out there, and then you have that actual object or person or food or whatsoever, and it's not in accordance to your mind. It's not in accordance to your expectation. So then there's kind of no satisfaction, you see? Because you believe your mind, and when you believe your mind and that's not a reality, when you meet the object, then there's no satisfaction because you didn't understand the reality of the object, right? So that's quite clear. With destructive emotions, they're all completely wrong with regards to the reality. That's very clear. And it's all rooted in what we talked about, this sense of a holding on to independent entities. So if you think, if I have this, I will be happy. If I have that, and then we see I as existing from its own side, and also the object as existing from its own side. And we create a reality in our mind that everything is independent, very solid. And then we can see that. When anger becomes very strong, we say, oh, this person is like that. And we hold that person as a very solid entity. Or when we have problems in life, same thing. We hold to our problems, and we think, I'm suffering. I'm the only one in the whole universe who is suffering like this. Nobody else. We often think like that when we have an issue in life. We see our problems as a very solid entity, as an unchanging kind of reality. And that's not true. Even if you're in the middle of depression, there will be one day you can look at it from a different angle. Right? That's very clear. That's why when we take a break or we have a holiday or we do something we never did before, that's a very good thing to do if you're down or you're in this cycle of being a bit down or depressed. It's good to do something you never did before. It's something to do with nature. Because my friends from the Netherlands are here. During COVID pandemic, where people were quite isolated, then many people got difficult, mentally. And in the Netherlands, there was a therapy called koeienknuffelen. Koeien means cows. Knuffelen means to hug. So there was a therapy in certain farmers. They organized that people from the big cities who never really been in nature, they could come to the farm and hug a cow. And that seems to be beneficial, believe it or not. Why is it beneficial? Because people do something else than their normal habituation patterns leads them to. So you break that pattern, and then you can take a distance from your problems. If you can take a distance from your problems, you have much more clarity. And then if you have much more clarity, you see it's not a big deal after all. And then you can solve it. If you're inside and stuck in your problem and you don't have that clarity, you be stuck for some time, right? So you have to break that cycle. So if it's koeien knuffelen or something else, or people do extreme sports for the exactly same reasons, although most people don't know it. Why do the people do extreme sports? Because it gives them a kick. Why does it give them a kick? Because they live in the present. You know, because if you live in the present, there's peace of mind. You don't think about the past and the future and worrying about things, right? So living in the present, the Buddha talked about 2,500 years ago already as a sustainable cause for happiness. Yeah. Because if you always worry about past and future and you're just constantly thinking, there's no peace of mind. But if you live in the present, then there's the real satisfaction is there. So these people who do extreme sports, if they don't live in the present and, you know, they don't pop up the parachute at the same time, then it's a disaster. Or free skiing down the hill, if they don't live in the present, then one or two trees will make an end to their skiing, right? So that's very clear that living in the present gives a kick. Yeah, so yeah, I often say, don't have to do these extreme sports. It's much easier just to sit on your cushion, and it is a much more productive way of more sustainable form. Yeah, so that's the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness can produce states of mind that gives real satisfaction in life. Yeah, and that's if you just take a few deep breaths, for example, and you get a peaceful mind. That by itself is already relaxing, and that by itself already gives value in life. You know, it's very interesting. So people who engage in these kind of techniques, as we see in the science, they produce gamma waves when they first start measuring these Olympic meditators. That they produce gamma waves beyond the chart. That was never measured before in the human brain. It's very interesting. So what does that mean, these high gamma waves, right? That's very interesting. So those people who have, you know, we have quite a few then, 15,000 till 50,000 hours of meditation behind their, you know, have done so many hours of meditation. They produce gamma waves. That means that they don't grasp at problems anymore. They don't grasp at emotions anymore. It's like, you know, drawing into a river. You know, if you have a little creek or something, and you draw with your letters, or with your finger, you draw some letters there. Yeah, peace, something like that. Then before you know it, it's gone, right? So that means people with this kind of meditative experience, whenever they meet a problem in life, it's kind of, they're not influenced by it, you know? So for us, it's like written in stone. When we have a problem in life, or the strong destructive emotions that come up, we're completely disturbed, you know? So that's very interesting research to see that you can deal with issues in life in a way to have, what do you need? You need distance and you need acceptance, right? If you have distance and acceptance, then you can deal with things in life much better. We just talked about distance already gives you clarity. Yeah, if you're stuck with a problem, or with a problem at the office, or at the family, and you take a break from the office or take a break from the family, then you come back and you say, oh, now I see things much clearer, right? Why do we see things much clearer? Because you took a distance. And if you take a distance, you're not entangled with all the little gobbly-goo things of that issue. Right, and you take a distance, there's clarity, and you can think about it, right? So that's kind of very important aspects of mind training, where we say we have to build up awareness. Yeah, we have to get a clear picture of what's going on. Yeah, you have to understand the mind. And unfortunately, in modern society, to understand the mind is for many people very difficult, because there's so many. As we just already heard, a few mobile phones going here and there. Yeah, people just go to bed with a mobile phone, right? It's, instead of a partner, now they have the mobile phone. Yeah, yeah. And they wake up, and the first thing they do is not talking to the partner is talking to the mobile phone. Yeah, that's a reality. You know and it's nothing wrong. You can use these kind of facilities in a very good way, but it can also be very destructive. It gives, because it stimulates sensory perception. Yeah. Everything on the internet, everything on the mobile phone stimulates sensory perception. So that brings our mind outward. And it stimulates not only sensory perception, but also stimulates the afflictions and the destructive emotions. That's very clear. When we see something unpleasant, we get disturbed. When we see something attractive, we get attached. Yeah? And when we see something we don't like, we get aversion. Yeah? So you can see it triggers. With an untrained mind, it triggers a lot of afflictions. Yeah? That's very clear. And it gives disturbance that the mind goes outwardly. Yeah, that in modern society, the science behind it is also very clear and very sad, actually, that in the last 10 years, to ask people to sit on a chair in a room with nothing, for some people it's very difficult, because they're constantly distracted. So they don't know what's going on inside their minds. And then even people say, you can hear in society, people say, oh, my life is so wonderful. I have so many distractions. People say that, it's kind of because if you have distractions, you don't have to deal with your mind, and that's why people take drugs. That's why people go to parties. Not the main reason, but there can be one of the reasons. Or world trips, to go here, get bored, go somebody else, get bored, get somebody else, to have distractions from the mind. But if you don't deal with your mind, then wherever you go is not a real escape. Externally, yes, but internally, you cannot escape your mind. That's quite clear, right? And with drugs or you don't have to go to the extreme of drugs, but also you can, when you're tired and a bit down, then what people do, or surf the internet, or watch a movie, or something like that, or 2 or 3. And then there's temporarily, or when you're tired, same thing, Tenzin Namdak was a photo here of Tenzin Namdak, I think, once also. Yeah. In the other side, right? Tenzin Namdak he used to say that if you're tired, or the Buddhist practitioner, if you're tired, it's better to have a quick nap and continue, rather than talking and get distracted. Because a distraction is just a temporary kind of escape of the tiredness or unhappiness. Yeah, if you're unhappy or a bit down, and then you say, oh, let's surf the internet, or then let's watch a movie or 2 or whatsoever. Then you finished with surfing the internet, or you finished with watching the movie, actually you're much more tired than before. Yeah, that's very clear. That the stimulation of the senses does not bring any benefit. It's just a temporary distraction. So then for the beginner practitioner, it's not easy to sit down and meditate. Yeah, because many people then see what's going on in their mind. But if you understand your mind and you go through that, and then you be more aware of what's going inside your mind, then eventually you can generate an incredible form of peace of mind and satisfaction. So you can see there's many meditators who live high up in the mountains, in India, Nepal, and Himalayas, with so simple life, no electricity, no running water, very simple room, almost no possessions, but very content. Same when we were in Gyume. Now it's changed a little bit, but in the early days, there also, we lived with 7 monks in one room, and we only had a bed and half of a table. And then you have a few books on that half of a table, and that's it. And your robes, for example, that's it. And one cup, one bowl, one plate, and one spoon. That was it. Yeah, so simple. And then the food is almost every day the same, so you don't have to think to only once a while. That's very nice, because Gyume Tantric is a very strict discipline, and we have pujas sometimes. 14 hours a day or something. Early you get up like 3 o'clock in the morning, and so it's quite. But then there's also a little bit of attachment is there, because when we have long pujas, they give deep fried potato bread, which the Tibetans really love. So then when it happens, then when you come out of the second session, what happens? The school kids, they clean the stairs, and they put all the slippers. Normally you put your slippers there. If you ever been to these monastic institutions, you know all the slippers are outside. And the kids, they put them here, very ordered in a kind of square around the steps. So when that happens and you come out, you know, oh, today we have deep fried potato bread for lunch. And then, well, everybody's kind of, yeah, so it's a little bit there. But generally speaking, if you have a very simple life, it reduces the afflictions, right? Yeah. That doesn't mean you have to go and live on the street, but it's our mental attitude we have towards these kind of aspects of life, right? That's very important to know. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being well off or wealthy or having good conditions in your life, but your afflictions that you have to deal with, because the stronger the desire is, the stronger the suffering will become. Yeah, so that's kind of there's nothing wrong with enjoying life or enjoying things in life, but the stronger the desire is, the more aspects of no satisfaction will arise. Yeah, so that's kind of the clue to be able to be aware of things that come and go in your mind. Yeah, and then to deal with things coming and going. Yeah, that's also very important aspects in the Buddhist teaching, that we say we cannot prevent ourselves from feeling or having a sensation of something, either pleasure or suffering. We cannot prevent a feeling of pleasure. We cannot prevent a feeling of suffering or neutral feeling. We cannot prevent the feeling. But we can train our mind, how do we react to these feelings, right? So that's kind of one part of the training as well. And then understanding the reality in that way, that helps us to to deal with issues in life much better. Yeah, yeah. So maybe we have a short break. Yeah. You have to go, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So in advance.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
See you later.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe also we have a break or not? Yeah. What's 15 minutes? Is that enough? Yeah. Have something to drink and stretch your legs. And, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Doe het zelf. Allee, you stop the recording. Yeah. Okay, we continue. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Is it okay? Ready to roll? Yeah. Okay, everybody ready? Had your tea, your snack, your cause for happiness. Yeah, distraction. It's true, the more tea, that's what I miss in the UK. Kind of Indian chai. But yeah, the more I drink Indian chai, it's not I become happier and happier. That's quite clear, Yeah. Yeah, so let's then continue, and then before we continue, make sure we have the correct motivation again, right? So to know that we're here in order to understand the mind, understand reality, in order to train the mind for more happiness for self and others. Yeah, so try to motivate yourself. Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about a few things with destructive emotions that are not according to reality, and fear for death is not according to reality. And when you have those kind of types of fear or those kind of types of afflictions or destructive emotions, then you go against reality, right? And that causes a problem. And fear for things is exactly the same thing. We fear things that are not there. That's most of the things we worry about, we have fear for, is just made up in the mind. Yeah, that's very clear. That forms of anxiety, and especially in modern times, so many people struggling with thinking that something will happen or something is out there, but it's not really there. It's very clear. So, and those types of fear are based on misunderstanding reality. Yeah, that's very clear. That if you don't understand reality properly, then you create problems for yourself. And we see that with fear for death, and Go back to Carlo Rovelli, it's very interesting in his book on time. He says, fear for death is a fault of evolution. Why would you fear something that is a reality? It's a very interesting statement, right? Why should you fear something that's a reality? But the thing we do, we fear things that are not a reality. You know, we don't fear reality, but we fear things that are not a reality. So that's completely opposite. It's actually completely stupid. Since beginner's lifetime, we hold on to a reality that's not really there, you know, and that reality is not really there, but then we believe that to be there. You see, so we just talked about already anger and attachment. You know, that anger and attachment superimpose or put something on top of the reality, and then we believe that. Yeah, so that's kind of anger overestimates the faults, attachment overestimates the qualities which are not there. You see? So that's kind of very clear that we create a reality in our mind and then believe that to be the reality, and then that creates problems if it's not a reality. And that's the same with fear for that, same with strong afflictions, same with fear or anxiety and things like that. People in their own minds create such a kind of misunderstanding, you know. So all these misunderstandings are based on seeing things very concrete, seeing things independent, seeing things existing from their own side. I have this problem, that's how I am, and I cannot change it. There's many people who think like that, you know. And it's very clear. The science in neuroplasticity is extremely clear that you can change your mind, change your brain. In a positive way, but also in a negative way. Because we often think about neuroplasticity in a positive way, but in a negative way it's exactly the same. If you build up a negative habituation pattern, your brain will change in that way. And then you will act in that way later on by the power of and that's very clear. The science in OCD, of obsessive compulsive disorder, in particular, how it's been explained and researched by Jeffrey Schwartz. It's very interesting. If you read Jeffrey Schwartz's book on the mind and the brain, it's very interesting science that you can, if you don't train your mind, your brain tells you what to do. Yeah. So because as a Buddhist, we have to accept the physical brain as being a part of our perception. That's very clear. Yeah. There's nothing without dependence. Yeah. So the physical brain has its relation in our perception. That's very clear. So it's very interesting science that if you don't train your mind, yeah, then previous habituation patterns, previous habituation patterns will tell you what to do. So in Buddhism, there's one school of Buddhist thought called the mind-only school, or the Chittamatra school of Buddhist philosophy. They very much, in great detail, talk about how do we perceive things and how is that perception influenced by previous habituation patterns. Very clear science, mind science. Yeah. So that those habituation patterns exactly the same we see in the field of neuroplasticity. Very clear. And that if you train your mind, you can train your brain. But that means that if you habituate your mind, you change your brain in a positive or a negative way. Yeah, that's very clear. So then the relationship, if you train your mind in a positive way, you would train your brain in a positive way. And that makes in the future, your brain tells you to do something positive. Yeah, that's very clear. If you study in the OCD research, going back to Jeffrey Schwartz's research, particularly, I think I mentioned that quite often, but I think it's so crystal clear. You know that. Leonardo DiCaprio, who is a kind of famous actor, and particularly in the movie The Aviator, when he plays an OCD patient, before he started doing the screening of the film, he did not have an OCD problem. Then for a few months he had to think, oh, now I have to wash my hands, now I have to do this, now I have to do that. So mentally, that's where you see why motivation is so important, right? Or intention. So he had the intention to do this, intention to do that. That caused his brain to change. So during the filming of a few months, he had to act as an OCD, person with a severe OCD problem. Then after the screening was done, he had an OCD problem. So it's very interesting. Before the screening, he did not have an OCD problem. Then he had to think mentally in a particular way, motivate himself, have an intention, and he created this kind of reality, you know. So that you could see after the habituation pattern, he creates this reality. So before, he didn't have an OCD problem, so his mind tells his brain what to do. Then, because the habituation being so strong, it changes the brain. Then the brain tells him what to do. And if you don't train your mind and rewire your brain, then you're just stuck. And that's what happened to him. So he went to Jeffrey Schwartz, and then Jeffrey Schwartz told him by, what Jeffrey Schwartz calls the power of mental force or the power of mental attention. Which is very similar as, basically the same as in Buddhism we talk about alertness and mindfulness, two very important mental factors, or sometimes alertness is being translated as introspection and mindfulness, two very important mental factors. Any form of mental difficulty we facing, if you train your mind in these two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, you can make a shift. That's very clear. The science of Jeffrey Schwartz is very clear with people with OCD, with an OCD issue. Of course, it depends on how severe the mental challenges are, right? But there's a possibility of change. That's definitely very, very clear in the science. Yeah. So if you train your mind in these two mental factors of alertness and mindfulness, what you actually teach yourself is to direct your mind and not believe what the brain tells you, or one aspect is the release of neurotransmitters, and that it's just probability. Basically, if you look at the science, it's nothing else than probabilities, right? In Buddhism, it's very similar, because we say there is no inherent I or self that decides. It's just probabilities. The higher score the probabilities are of a positive thought, the highest chance you will generate a positive thought. The higher probability of generating a negative thought, the chances are much higher to generate a negative thought. That's the science. It's nothing else than what are the potentials in the mind. Yeah, so that's kind of very interesting. So that means if you train your mind in those two mental factors, you can reverse this whole process. In the sense, you can tell your brain what to do. You tell your mind what to do. You be in control. You teach yourself not to follow particular thought patterns. Yeah, because what alertness does, the mental factor alertness, what it says, you are alert. You recognize that your mind is planning to tell you something or wanted to let you do something. Or in meditation, you get distracted. Yeah, the way we train in alertness is to count the breath, for example. Yeah, if you do meditation and you count the breath from 1 to 10 and you start over counting, then as soon as your mind thinks about yesterday or thinks about tomorrow or thinks about this evening, you're alert about that. If you're not alert about that, then your mind is gone, right? You know that probably if you try to meditate and before you know it, a few minutes are just gone, and you think, oh, the minutes just passed by. Because you were distracted all the time. There was no alertness. You didn't recognize the distraction. So alertness recognizes the disturbance or recognizes the distraction. If you train your mind in counting the breath, for example, whenever there's a thought, you be alert, right? If you don't have this alertness, you never recognize the thoughts and you're just stuck in the thought patterns, nothing else. Yeah. So alertness is a very important mental factor. Yeah. The second mental factor is mindfulness. Yeah, mindfulness is often misunderstood, and there's a lot of, especially in modern society, mindfulness is just very, very popular. Just being more aware of things and live in the present, and there's a lot of all kind of interpretations what mindfulness actually means, right? Of course, there's benefit in living in the present and be aware. That's for sure true. But mindfulness is much more sophisticated than that. Mindfulness goes a step deeper and a step further. There's a lot of books written in modern times of Buddhist scholars to go beyond mindfulness, for example, right? Or right mindfulness. Yeah, there are very interesting books written about what mindful actually traditional means. So traditional mindfulness is a mental factor that is remembrance, that remembers an object you're familiar with. That's the meaning of mindfulness. So for example, if you go back to the breathing exercise as a training in alertness and mindfulness, right? So what you do is you, for a few minutes, you say, okay, 2 or 3 minutes, you say, now I'm only counting the breath, nothing else. So then when you start that, then one thought pops up, another thought pops up. Then alertness recognizes those thoughts. And mindfulness says, no, 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 I shouldn't follow these thoughts. I should concentrate on the breath. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. So mindfulness is remembering us what we are supposed to be doing. So the more you train your mind in counting the breaths for a few minutes every morning, you train in these 2 mental factors. One mental factor, alertness, is kind of the police at the corner of your mind. Your main mind is counting the breath, right? The main aspect of the mind. But in the corner there is a kind of alertness present, like a police on the side. As soon as there is a thought, you recognize it. And with mindfulness, you bring your mind back to what you're supposed to be doing, in this case, the counting of the breath. So if you train in those 2 mental factors, whenever the mind drifts off, you recognize it and bring it back. You see that? So whenever there's a thought, you recognize it and brings your mind back. So if you train in those 2 mental factors, then later on in life, when you generate a good motivation or intention for the day, I'm not going to follow these negative thoughts, for example, right? Then every hour or so, you can probably have a few seconds every hour, right? Yeah. So then every hour or so, you just try to do a few breaths and you try to recall this intention from the morning. If you do that, then you'll be much more alert and much more aware. Then whenever there's a negative thought that comes by, you recognize with alertness, and with mindfulness you say, I'm not going to follow this. When thoughts come, initially it just happens to us, and we like in this emotional hijack, right? But the more you train your mind in these forms of being more aware of what's going on, time slows down. Yeah, it's very true. Time is very subjective. Normally when we have a destructive emotion overpowering us, it just happens to us. And we're angry, or we negative thoughts, or we follow this, we follow that. It's just we in this emotional hijack, so to say. But if you train your mind with counting the breath every morning for a few minutes, and every hour you try to recall that, for sure you will develop yourself in a way to be much more aware. If you're more aware, then a few seconds of irritation you can subdivide in split seconds. And you see, oh, this is the first initial negative thought. Oh, this is the second moment. Oh, now it gets stronger. Oh, now it gets stronger. Oh, now I'm lost. So that initial moments you're gonna see much clearer. Yeah, for an untrained mind, you don't see that. It just happens and you're stuck. But if you train your mind in this awareness building by, because awareness building means if you concentrate on one point, your mind becomes much clearer. It's similar as a lake in the mountains when there's no wind and blue sky, and then everything is like a mirror in that lake, right? And then when the wind comes of the disturbing emotions, then the clarity goes, So that means that if you have this peace of mind, and you keep that peace of mind with these 2 mental factors, as soon as there's a negative thought, you be alert, and with mindfulness you remember not to follow it. Yeah, it's easier to say than be done, but if you put effort, for sure it's going to work. That's very clear. So if that's the case, then in the future, when initially you just overpower it in an emotional hijack, but then you just recognize the first moment, you recognize the second moment, and before it becomes too strong, you can take action. And you can decide not to follow this thought. And then it becomes very interesting. Because then over time, you just look. It's like much more interesting than watching a movie. If you just look inside your mind, you say, oh, look, irritation, interesting. And then you have this distance. If you have this distance and you just observe the irritation rather than getting involved into it, it loses its potential because you just look at it as a play of the mind. That's what we say. It's just a play of the mind, that we create so much of the reality inside the mind, either positive or negative. So the more we be aware of the initial moments or the initial thoughts of the negative thoughts, the more we're aware of the initial moments, we can still take action. When they become too strong, it's often too late. And then it's better to go for a walk or have some social kind of activity or physical exercise, to do something else, to try to break, as we just talked about, extreme sports, or do something you never did before. It breaks the cycle, right? That's what we can do. We cannot, if you're completely into an anger attack or an emotional hijack, and somebody said, "Oh, please sit and meditate on patience," you said, "What? Me?" It will not really help. It's better just to relax and do some social activity or exercise and break that circle, right? But if you every morning, everybody has a few minutes, right? Every morning, if you just do some counting of the breath, and it's not. I mean, meditation doesn't mean relaxing and try to have a good time or something. That's not the purpose of meditation, right? Meditation means you have to walk. There's effort involved. Why is there effort involved? Because you need these two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, right? Don't do as stupid as I was when I was young and into spirituality and then going to the forest and sitting under a tree and not knowing how to meditate. I was just wasting my time, right? So that's very clear that you have to know how to meditate, and then you can use it. So if you meditate and you really count the breath, and you really put some effort, as soon as there is a thought, recognize. As soon as a thought comes, mindfulness, bring your mind back. Yeah, if you use that technique, you get in control of your mind. And then that's exactly what we just talked about, these Olympic meditators, who completely control over their mind. Of course, they have feelings, because feelings we cannot escape, but they know how to react towards those feelings. Same with His Holiness Dalai Lama, for example, when Paul Ekman, one world leader expert in facial expressions, as you probably know, when he saw His Holiness, he said, "I've seen so many faces in so many cultures. I pinpointed down 10,000 muscular differences in the face, but I never seen a face like this." It's very interesting. Why did he never see? What does that mean? I never saw a face like this. It means that when His Holiness when you talk with His Holiness about the case Tibet or the suffering that's happening in the world, of course there's a feeling and an emotion, right? But there's a bit of sadness, but straight away there's a laughter. That means there's no grasping and holding on to negative patterns of the mind. You see, and that's what we call these accomplishments of, we cannot escape the feeling or sensation, but our reaction to those sensations and feelings we can train. Yeah, so that's kind of this capacity of this alertness and mindfulness to be able to be alert and to recognize that's a distraction or negative thought coming up, and with mindfulness you decide not to follow it. Yeah, it sounds very simple, right? Yeah, but that's how it works. Because if you, same as I often say, if a person is lying to you, and you know that, and this person knows that you know that he or she is lying, that person stops lying, right? That's very clear. These destructive emotions, exactly the same thing. When you believe them, they become stronger. When you do not believe them, they lose their potential. So that's very true. The more you understand that destructive emotions are not in accordance with reality, the more they lose their potential. Yeah, there's a very interesting text it's not an easy text though, by Panchen Lobsang Chögyal Gyatso, one of the Panchen Lamas, who wrote the text Wisdom Debating Ignorance. It's very interesting material. Wisdom debating ignorance, then ignorance says, "You, wisdom, you just knew I'm here since beginner's lifetime. You're gonna lose, I'm gonna win." Yeah. And then wisdom says, "Yes, but you apprehend reality in a complete erroneous way. So I know reality, so you will lose the game." Yeah. So there's a very interesting dialogue between wisdom and ignorance. Yeah. Sorry, I just have some tea. So, and it's a very interesting text because also it talks about very subtle aspects of reality. And His Holiness Dalai Lama even said, based on this text, I understand the Prasangika view much better. So it's not an easy text though, but yeah. So that means that ignorance misunderstands reality, and wisdom eliminates that because wisdom understands reality. So what does that mean? For the last 15, 20 minutes. So what is ignorance then? This misunderstanding of reality, right? So ignorance, as the name says, ignorant. Yeah, in Tibetan we say ma ripa. Ripa means to know, ma is a negative, not knowing reality. And we have different types of reality, right? Aurobindo mark is yeah, here or the Kasa, yeah. And there's a green park and everything. I still remember. I've been so many times. Oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So the Aurobindo mark, there's a few cars there at the moment. Quite a few. You know? Yeah. So which color of cars there are at the moment, we can guess, but we don't know. Yeah, that's also a form of ignorance, you know? Here the weather is quite stable in the sense that you can more or less predict what will be the weather tomorrow. But there are certain cases if you come to London and you look at a weather app or you look outside, then looking outside is much more accurate. Yeah, yeah. So that means that certain aspects of reality we don't know. We don't know which cars there are. We don't know what's the weather tomorrow in certain places, right? That's not much of interest, that ignorance, unless you really get frustrated if you don't know it, right? But that's not really the issue here. The issue here with not understanding reality, that's the thing. Yeah, that we misunderstand reality, and that's the cause for suffering. So this ignorance means it holds on to an I and mine. It holds on to an ego or a self-identity, or as David Bohm says, is a kind of self-deceptive thought. It's a thought that misunderstands reality. Yeah, that's what David Bohm gets at, and that's exactly the same what the Buddha talked about. I mean, very much similar. You know, that there is a sense of an I, and that I, as we already did a little try that I said count to 3, get angry, you didn't get angry. Then I talked about your hair and your dress and in a negative way, and you get irritated. You say, how dare Namdak say this to me? I am not like this. Yeah, and then the I comes up and anger comes. With desire is exactly the same thing. Yeah, I need this, I need that, my phone, or a combination of the two is very clear. Struck me once when now I don't know where we are in the iPhone numbers, but there was one point of time the iPhone 4 came out many years ago in China, and then the first shop in that city was going to open at 9 o'clock, and you could get your iPhone there. You knew one, the first one. So many people line up in the front of the shop. Guess what? The shop didn't open at 9 o'clock. So then the people get so annoyed, they try even physically throwing stones at the windows of the shop, because I need my iPhone now. Right? So that's the meaning of iPhone is probably. I don't know. I don't know if it's the same I. Does it stand for the I, or it stands for information or something? Maybe I'm not sure. Yeah. So it's very clear that with attachment, you need this. Yeah. If you don't get it, there's aversion, and anger comes. Why? Because you don't meet your object of attachment. Yeah. So if you don't meet your object of attachment, there's a kind of irritation, because the stronger your attachment is, the stronger the irritation becomes. And that's why people do these things, right? So they don't get their object of attachment, so they get angry. Yeah. So you can see it's rooted in the sense of I need this. Same with anger, I. Yeah, that's very clear. And then we already talked about the science behind it in Kasa. The more narcissistic you are, the more problems you create for self and others. That's very clear. Yeah. Jared Post, he passed away during the pandemic, but he was a very interesting psychiatrist. He worked for the CIA, if you probably maybe know. And Jared Post, his job was to profile world leaders like Saddam Hussein and those kind of people, because the government, the CIA, was interested. If you do this, how will that person react? And people who are very narcissistic, it's very predictable. Yeah. So then some people asked him to Trump, but it was not allowed to do that. Yeah, anyway. But you can see the more narcissistic you are, the more problems you create. That's very, very clear. Yeah, and that's the science behind it. Also, often that's very. I mean, if you read, books on altruism by Venerable Maitreya Ricard, for example, it's very interesting book. That you can see the science behind altruism and the science behind selfish thought, or the science behind an ego. Very clear. Or you can read in Healing Emotions, for example, by Daniel Komen, also very clear. That the research by Daniel Brown, it's very simple research. You sit underneath the table, you have a counter, you talk with a person 10, 15 minutes, and you just count the words I, me, how many times that person is expressing. Because we know from linguistics, the way we talk is a reflection of our emotional life. It's very clear. The way we express our face is related with our... Nothing is beyond dependent origination, right? So then the higher scores in the words I, me, myself. There's also a rap song by De La Soul or Run DMC. I always mix those two up. Me, myself, and I. Yeah, that's so right. De La Soul, right? Yeah, I was corrected once, but I forgot it. Yeah. So you count that, and then you look at the data, and then you do it with a few thousand people, and then you look at their health records, physical, mental health, and then you draw conclusions. It's very simple science. And then there's a significant correlation with the higher score in verbalizations related with self-concern and mental health being difficult. Low self-esteem, depression, for example, or physical things, high blood pressure, things like that as well. It's very clear science. So the Buddha 2,500 years ago always said this I is a cause for suffering. Yeah, this ego, so to say. And the science with psychedelics is also very clear, right? That people with trauma, people with severe mental issues, when they have therapy, not just by themselves, but a therapy-controlled environment, and then best, of course, using not the synthetic ones, but the organic kind of aspects of Kasa, what did I say? Psychedelics, right? That, why does it help? It's a temporary thing, right? Why does it temporarily help? Because there's an ego dissolution happening. It's very interesting. If there's an ego dissolution, there's no grasping to a self in a coarse way. And that's exactly why it functions. It's a very temporary thing, because it only lasts for a certain amount of time, but for some people it gives them a shift in life. It's very interesting, So Anil Seth, I just mentioned him, he does something similar with the Dream Machine as one of his projects. It's not like LSD, for example, because one of my friends, he went to the Dream Machine and he took LSD before, so he said it's not quite the same, but but it's a very interesting aspect of that he works with sensory perception, with flicking of lights, and then people see all kind of things, and then they get some experience and they see something else, and that shifts their perception, and that with that shift of their perception, that's for some people helps when they have mental issues, right? So that project is very interesting. Yeah. So that same with the psychedelics, it goes a bit further, though. But you can see when there's ego dissolution, it seems to help the person. Yeah. It's not seeing things that's really that much of a significant help, but the ego dissolution and feeling connected with others. That seems to be an incredible help. In a similar way, people who have a near-death experience, for example, there also is a kind of a coarse form of ego dissolution happening. Yeah, the mind becomes more subtle, people feel more connected. When they come back to life, when they don't come back to life, then of course, then end of the story. But when they come back to life, then the majority of the people who have an NED, near-death experience, their life changes in a completely positive way. The majority, right? If they can talk about it. Those who cannot talk about it, or people don't believe them or think they're crazy, then that causes a problem, right? But if they can talk about it and be accepted in that way, they become more spiritual, more compassionate, more value in life, no fear for death anymore, much more value. So that's very interesting science. That means that if there's an ego dissolution happening, people become happier, you know. So that's exactly the same as we see in the science of narcissistic people, that the more narcissistic you are, the more unhappy you become. Yeah, so it's very clear that this ignorance of grasping and holding to an I am mine is the cause for all the problems. If you see that I am mine is not really there, the way it appears, then actually there's much more peace of mind. Why is there more peace of mind? Because the destructive emotions, they lose their fuel. The destructive emotions, they use building blocks of concrete aspects of reality. This person is like this and is unchangeable, or my problem is like this. It's not possible to change. That's how I am. Yeah, to see things in very concrete ways is an obstacle for development. Yeah, that's very clear. And the more you grasp at reality as such, the more problems you create for yourself. And as David Bohm already said that this self-deceptive thought is just a show. It's not really there. Yeah, and the Buddha also 2,500 years ago said already, this I is not really there the way it appears. There's a conventional person here sitting and listening or writing things down or contemplating things. That conventional person exists, right? We know you just have to put a needle somewhere in your body and you know there's a body there. Yeah, and you watch your thoughts or your ideas and you know there is something there, right? Experience is there. So you cannot refute a body and a mind. That's pretty obvious. But what appears to your mind as a solid entity of I am mine, that you cannot find anywhere. Because if you look in your body, it's just a very complex system of bones and muscles and vessels and skin and organs and things like that, changing moment by moment, right? Yeah, every day 50 billion cells, or 50 or 60, depends on which cells you count, change, right? Yeah, so that's a few 100,000, I think, a second, you know. So that means that our body appears, when we look in the mirror, appears the same as an hour ago. And we think it will be the same as an hour later, right? If we look in the mirror, we think, oh, that's me, and I'm like this still. I'm still the same. It's very stupid, because when you look at the picture when you were 12, and you look in the mirror, you see there's a difference there, right? And the difference didn't happen last night. Can you imagine? Waking up like 30 years later and look completely with gray hair and things like that. This will be a shock, you know. But that change happens over the years and months and weeks, days, hours, minutes, seconds, split seconds. Every split second there's a change. It doesn't appear like that. That's very clear, right? Same as the painting on the wall, it appears to be like that. But every second there's disintegration happening, you know. Yeah, otherwise these things will not appear at a particular time, right? That happens over time, that things disintegrate every split second. That doesn't appear to our mind, right? So you can see how we easily believe in this kind of reality that appears very solid, but that's not really true, you know. So it's with our body, our mind, and then in particular with this apprehension or holding on to an I. This I appears in a very solid, independent way. But if you look in your body, momentary changing kind of complex system of organs and things like that, where is this solid I in your body? You cannot find it anywhere, right? And then you look out your mind, and your mind is just popping from one thought to the other, and one perception to the other, and one sensation and feeling and ideas coming back and forth, and seeing things, hearing things, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking about things. It's a constant process of coming and going of the mind as well, you know. So there you cannot really find a solid entity, is it? In your mind? In your body? So it appears very solid, very independent, all by itself. How dare this person say this to me? I am not like this, or I need this phone, or I need that, you know, or, you know, how dare this person, where you get criticized, for example. It's a very strong sense of a self that arises. You want to protect. And it's the most important thing in the whole universe, kind of this I that appears. But where is this I then? You know, if you really look, you cannot find it anywhere in the body. You cannot find it anywhere in your mind. Meaning the way it appears, you cannot find. Because why do we say the way it appears? Because that's very important. Because the way it appears, it causes problems. The way the I appears, that causes anger. The way the I appears, that causes attachment or desire. Yeah. So this I appears in a very solid, independent way. But if you really look for it, you cannot find it, because your body is in the nature of dependence, your mind is in the nature of dependence, and this I appears in an independent way, all by itself. Yeah, so that's kind of why the Buddha said, this I is not really there. Yeah, that this I is not really there means this independent entity, this I that appears in a very solid, from its own side existing way, is not really there. So what we try to do is just see how it appears, and then see, where is it then? I cannot find it in the body, I cannot find it in the mind, and then we say it's not there. And then you understand emptiness. Yeah? Emptiness does not mean nothingness, it's empty of something. Yeah? Emptiness means always empty of something, right? The simplest example we always use is that this temple is empty of an elephant, or empty of a monkey, or what you also like to say. If you don't know what an elephant or a monkey looks like, you can never talk about the emptiness of a monkey or an elephant, right? You first have to understand what is an elephant and what is a monkey, in order to know this room is empty of a monkey or empty of an elephant. In the same way, if you say emptiness of inherent existence, we first have to understand what is inherent existence. How does this I appear to the mind? Yeah, that's if you have this clear, and the only way to get it clear is to analyze and see, how does I appear when you get angry? We're not interested in anger. We're only interested in how the I appears. Or how does I appear when there's strong desire? Also there we're not interested in desire. We're only interested in how the I appears. Or when you get criticized. Yeah, so next time you get criticized, instead of scolding the person, you say, okay, lasso. In Tibetan there's a very good way to get out of problems. Is walking backwards and say lasso. That means kind of, okay, you're right, okay, you're right, okay. And then slowly go away. You know? So, and then you do that next time you get scolded or you get criticized. Instead of fighting back, you just see, how does I appear? And then you can see, I'm not like this. If it's true or not, it's not the issue. It's just see how the I appears. You know, you go to the bathroom or something, you just sit there, I appears. Because that's a very interesting aspect. Then you learn how the I appears. It's very important. And then you analyze, where is it then? It's in my body. Can I find it anywhere? Can I find it anywhere in my mind? Or can I find it separate from my body and your mind? And also that's not there. So you come to the conclusion that I is not there, and that's eventually will solve the problem. That's very clear in a very interesting example in a conversation between His Holiness Dalai Lama, a person who was depressed, and a psychiatrist. It's very interesting. Tenzin Sepala sent me once, but I lost it in my files. But it's a very interesting story. That this lady came to His Holiness with her doctor, a psychiatrist, and then she said, I am depressed. And then His Holiness doesn't, His Holiness is very direct. His Holiness said, oh, it's very sad to hear that, please sit down. Sorry to hear that. His Holiness didn't say that. His Holiness said, why are you depressed? And he says, I'm depressed. And His Holiness says, who is depressed? He said, I'm depressed. And His Holiness says, where is that I? He said, here. And then so said, okay, close down, because close your eyes. And you try to move this eye from the left to the right for a few centimeters. And she closes her eyes, and she looks, and she laughs. It's not there. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting example, because if you see it's not there, the problem is solved. I mean, not completely, but the start of the solving of the problem is there. Because, if you see there is no, from its own side existing entity, there's no I that is depressed, or there's no I that has low self-esteem, or there's no I that needs to get angry, or there's no I that needs to be blamed. People with self-guilt and shame, I don't know, in India, those also exist. I lived in Sera Monastery for more than 2 decades, and then Lama Zopa Rinpoche, my main teacher, asked me to go to the big city of London, and I lived in the monastery. We were quite remote, Sera is kind of like, what is it, 15, 20 minutes walk from the forest, and 15 minutes by rickshaw to the local village, and 2 hours to the nearest city, Mysore, you know. So we're quite remote, and I didn't go out that often. I went to Bangalore once, last few years of the studies, once a month. But then, yeah, go to Bangalore, do my job, and leave. So then I came to London, and then I heard mean things about shame and self-guilt and things like that. So I asked my friends in London, the team, you know, I said, please explain. It's very interesting that certain aspects, people create an incredible reality in their mind, you know. It's very clear that is mentally fabricated. Yeah, and it's all rooted in a sense of an I. Because if you understand there's no I, there's no person to be blamed. There's no one that is guilty. It's just a habituation pattern of the past that makes you think in a particular way or nothing else. So the more you understand reality of emptiness, or the reality of no self or no inherent self, there's so much more freedom. You know? And as His Holiness says, if you contemplate this on a regular basis, it looks like afflictions do not arise. And it's true. Because the more you contemplate ultimate reality or emptiness, or proving emptiness with dependent origination, then there's so much more freedom. Because there's no I to be blamed, and there's no I, and if there's no I, then there's no building blocks for the destructive emotions, right? So that's kind of very interesting. David Bohm is a very interesting personality. Unfortunately, he didn't become that famous because he was kicked out of the, as you know, or out of the scientific community, because he was able to prove something other people didn't like, and they couldn't disprove him, so they decided we just ignore him. Yeah. But David Bohm was a very interesting personality, right? If you see his dialogues with other scientists, one dialogue is so striking. There's two scientists who are a little bit kind of, in Tibetan we say pusdopo, means kind of very strong views and think they're the right ones, and you know. And then there's David Bohm sitting there, and His Holiness sitting on the side. And David Bohm is very calm and talking about things in a very relaxed manner, and these two scientists are very uptight and things like that. And His Holiness looks at David Bohm and says, wow, that's why His Holiness called David Bohm his science guru, right? Yeah, it's very interesting. David Bohm was very intelligent, but also because he understood a little bit of reality, he doesn't grasp to these things, you know. So that's, even for scientists, same thing. Carlo Rovelli, I mentioned before, same thing. If you understand dependent origination, yeah, that's what he talks about, his theory of relations, so to say. Carlo Rovelli says, you know, what actually is matter is a web of correlations, he says, you know, relative information. There are no properties outside of relationships, he says. So if you look at Carlo Rovelli understanding this dependence, then he is so compassionate. Because if you understand reality in that way, you feel responsible for others, you know, because you see we're all part of the same family, right? You see the dependence. And that's why a person like Carlo Rovelli, who understands this dependence, even with the Schrödinger's cat, you know, Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, the cat is either dead or alive, right? But because Carlo Rovelli doesn't like to say that. He said the cat is either asleep or awake. He said talking about dead cats is not nice. And also, a few weeks ago, he wrote a very interesting, he had an interview with The Guardian, as one quite well-known newspaper in the UK, and very interesting about world peace and disarmament. You can see, people who understand this reality of dependence, they become much more compassionate, you know, so that's another very powerful tool of understanding emptiness and understanding dependent origination, right? Because if the ego goes, then of course you think about others, right? So that's why understanding ultimate reality brings so much peace for yourself, and also brings peace for others, right? So that's kind of why the teachings or understanding of ultimate reality are quite important. And we see, just to summarize, that all the problems and the suffering we experience are rooted in misunderstanding of reality. As we saw with anger, misunderstanding reality, only think about the faults, attachment, misunderstanding reality, only think about the qualities, and then this ignorance, thinking there's this I there, which you cannot find. But then believing it to be reality causes a lot of problems. So you can see and then with the narcissistic aspects. So you can see that ignorance is the root of suffering, and understanding reality actually helps us to eliminate the suffering. Yeah, so that's what we started with, to quote by the great seventh Dalai Lama, that if you see that all sentient beings are empty of inherent existence, and they can realize that, but if they do not realize it, then they're stuck in samsara. And for that purpose, I'm here to eliminate that suffering, right? So, yeah, so maybe that's a good point to stop. Yeah, and then if there's any questions, then we can see if there's any answers or not. Yeah. Yeah. Allez, ego dissolution. Allez, suicide. Yeah, suicide is... Yeah. Yeah. So suicide is just a very temporary thing, right? Same as any form of an addiction is just a temporary escape. It doesn't solve the problem. Why doesn't it solve the problem? Because in Buddhism we talk about the continuity of consciousness. Yeah, so that if you die, it's not the end. This body, yes, but the continuity of consciousness goes further, right? So that's we believe in the continuity of consciousness after life. Yeah, same if you look in the research of the near-death experience, it seems to be indicating that there is a subtle form of consciousness that does not depend on a physical brain, as we can measure at the moment, right? So, and that's a very controlled environment in operation theater when they measure everything. Yeah, so it's very interesting science. That there is subtle forms of consciousness that is having a perception, and if you look at the data, then 80 to 90 something percent is valid perception, right? So that means there is a consciousness that does not depend on the brain. When they do CPR and the person comes back to life, of course, the person can talk about experience, right? If they don't come back to life, where does the consciousness go, right? So then in Buddhism, we say that the continued consciousness continues. So if you just stop this life, it's just a temporary thing because the continuity will continue, right? So it's better to train the mind and to accept the difficulties you're facing, how difficult it sometimes is, and then try to work with it, and that will project in a much better result in the future as well, in future states of existence, right? And yeah, there's also a lot of science in children remembering previous lifetimes, for example, by Professor Stevenson from the University of Virginia and his student Jim Tucker. So there's a lot of science seems to indicate the continuity of consciousness, right? So in Buddhism we very much talk about that with various reasons. So that suicide in that way is like taking drugs, right? It's just a temporary escape. It's not really solving the problem. So the real solvement of the problem means to, what we just talked about, is to understand what is causing these problems and to do something about it. Yeah, and even people who are suicidal, and we all have that, I think, especially in certain difficult periods of time, is not later on when you go over it, you're so happy you didn't do it. So that's kind of it's just when you're in the midst of a kind of difficulty in life, then it looks there's no way out. But there's a way out. Even for the worst kind of scenarios, there's always a way out, because things are in the nature of dependence, things are in the nature of change, right? It's just a matter of time and putting some effort, So that's kind of what we then, yeah, that's maybe the answer, I think, is it? Is that the answer or not? Yeah, 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 okay, yeah.
Yeah, you said I is a big body or...
Yeah. Yeah.
I is everywhere.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah. It's an appearance. The appearance exists, but the I does not exist. Same if you dream about an elephant, right? The dream elephant exists. The appearance of the dream elephant exists, but it's not an elephant, you see? So that means what appears to the mind appears to exist in an inherent way, and that's not a reality. So, that's why we have to very clearly get a clear picture of how does the I appear when we get angry, or when there's a strong desire, or when you get criticized, or when there's fear for death, for example. There's a very strong sense of a self you want to protect. And this self appears in a very independent way. That self we cannot find. That self cannot exist because everything is in the nature of dependence. So that means the appearance exists, but that means the mind to which it appears, that exists. But if you look at what appears, that does not exist. Yeah, so that this I we hold on to, that we cannot find. There's no solid entity in your body, there's no solid entity in your mind. And of course, everybody talks about that, and especially in modern society, there's a lot of ego pumping, or whatever you like to call it, ego cherishing, and oh, you the one, you this, you that, and then they sell the product much better, because if you look at the products in the commercial industry, the more there's an ego cherishing, people like that, And if people cherish you, it's if people praise you, you like that, right? So that's why and that generates attachment, and you buy the products, But a person who criticizes you, you don't like. But actually, a person who criticizes you is actually very beneficial, because that person helps you to practice patience, that person helps you to recognize the I, and from a Buddhist perspective, also helps you to purify negative karma, right? So in that way, it's kind of, interesting to see. But to go back to your question is, you have to be very clear which I does exist and which I does not exist. That's very clear. That distinction should be very clear. There's an I, or conventional person, who goes from this to the next life, for example, or that like to accomplish tasks in life, right? That conventional I exists. Yeah, there's a body, there's a mind, we make decisions, we have ideas, we do motivations, we do certain studies, we take decision to do a particular job or whatsoever. That conventional I exists. But that's not the problem. That conventional I is not the problem. The problem is this from its own side existing I that thinks it exists independently all by itself. And that's the fuel for anger and desire and all other jealousy and pride, exactly the same thing. Yeah. So that kind of independent I that appears in a particular way, but you cannot find it anywhere. That particular I does not exist. So it's very important to understand which I does exist and which I does not exist. Yeah. So that's why we refute, or we say this independent I, it appears, but whatever appears is not always reality. And we know that from many things, from the dream. In the dream we think it's reality, but it's not. Or the train example, when there's movement in the corner of your eye, you think you're moving, then you look at a platform and you know it's not true. So there's so many things that appear, and the rubber hand experiment, as we just talked about, there's so many things we think is reality, but it's not, right? So then you can see this I we hold on to exists from its own side. That I, that does not exist. Yeah, to understand these points more, then His Holiness Dalai Lama says, now after 6 decades studying and contemplating, meditating it, now I start to understand it. So, and the way His Holiness contemplates it and we do is different, right? But that indicates that it's not an easy topic, So it needs time to get some experience. How does it appear? Study the text, and especially if you're interested, there's one good book by His Holiness called How to See Yourself as You Really Are, for example. Yeah, there's a very good introduction to these aspects of reality. Yeah. Yeah? Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked about the grasping and attachment to the outer, the objects that we were discussing, the main decision was there. But also there's an attachment and grasping to the inner. Let's say if we are starting practicing Dharma or meditation at that time, and because I teach Zen people, so this kind of, I see that
I want bodhicitta, I want to realize emptiness.
It's a byproduct
the
meditation, the byproducts of let's say what they call as
Yeah.
So what is that moment when you realize that we are getting attached?
Yeah. So there's a very clear distinction also we should make between attachment and aspiration. Right? Aspiration wanted to become a Buddha. Aspiration wanted to generate bodhicitta. Aspiration to realize emptiness. That's not attachment, because the object is not contaminated. Right? If you have a little bit understanding of reality, and then you think this conventional I wants to become a Buddha, right? Or this conventional I wants to generate bodhicitta, or this conventional I wants to realize emptiness. Then that's not too contaminated, right? Because it's not as grasping at the inherent I. But if you think I need this, I need that, I need to get bodhicitta, or I need this, that, and you have really strong sense of an I, because then you become famous, or people like you, and you get a lot of money, or whatsoever, then there's a contamination there, right? And that's attachment. Yeah. So it's very important to make a distinction between attachment and aspiration. So to aspire to become a Buddha with a pure motivation and understanding reality, it's not attachment, right? Attachment is focused upon an object that's contaminated. Yeah, so bodhicitta in general and liberation and enlightenment are not object of contamination. Another example, for those who study it a bit more, you can think about the person who becomes an arat, for example, right? A person who strives for self-liberation. That person does not have a self-cherishing thought. That person has an interest for the purpose of oneself, meaning to achieve liberation, right? With a very constructive way of thinking, all afflictions are cause for suffering, I need to eliminate these afflictions. Yeah, so that's a very constructive mind. Yeah, well, aspiration. Yeah, there's aspiration, right? So make a clear distinction between aspiration and attachment. Yeah, sorry, yeah, you ready? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did. Yeah. 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 True. Yeah. 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 I mean, if you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. So time, if you read Carlo Rovelli's interpretation of time, is very similar, almost the same as we talk about in Buddhism. Time is relative. Whatever you call the present depends on past and future. There's no present to be found, so to say. There's no from its own side existing present to be found. Carlo Rovelli is very clear with that as well. There's no, in quantum gravity, right? There's no present to be found. Because if you have the present, let's say you have 3 seconds, right? And the second is the present. That second, if you first have 3 seconds, let's say 3 seconds, that's the present. You define it as the present, right? But that's not true, because the first second is past and the third second is future. And the second is present. But if you look at the second, you can subdivide it again into 3, past, present, and future. That present among those 3, you can subdivide again into 3. That present moment among those 3, you can subdivide. You can go in infinite in time. So you cannot really find in from its own side existing present. So you can see that the present is extremely relative. And that's exactly what Carlo Rovelli is saying. The material world, same as time, is just relative information, right? It's nothing concrete. Yeah, so that's what we call time is just relative. But it moves forward. That's Carlo Rovelli is very clear about it. Buddhism is also very clear about it. Same as entropy, theory, time moves forward, right? That's clear. Yeah. Huh?
Then how do so like time travel?
I let time travel. You want to time travel? You are interested? Yeah. I mean, time travel is just a thought experiment, right? You cannot really time travel. You can go back in time to understand what happened in time. That's possible. The knowledge of the past, yes. But you cannot go back in time and change things and come back again. That's yeah. I don't know, but I mean, people can pop up, that's okay, but it doesn't mean they go back in time, right? So what we say is people who know this, just knowing or having the knowledge of the past, that's possible. And we cannot remember our previous lifetimes, but that does not mean they don't exist. We can also, if I tell you today, what's the date? Well, 6, 4, and 5. What do we decide? 6 January 2024, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then if I ask you, what did you do at the 6th of December at 1:20, 1982? You were born already? No. Yeah. So what did you do? You don't remember, right? I told this story once. My friends in Spain, and it was her birthday, and she said, it was my birthday. But generally speaking, you cannot remember, right? But there are people who can remember. So that means information is never lost. So there's this kind of what they call this phenomenon called hyperdementia, where people can, you give them a date 20 or 30 years ago, they say, okay, I went to the beach, it was beautiful weather, this was on the news, we had this for dinner, I met in these people. So clear, they just know. Because they have they know, they can access that information, right? And it was this lady, I found it very interesting, that's why I tell the story again and again. So in this talk show, because she became quite famous, because she could remember everything. She didn't like it because also depressions, everything she remembered, right? So then she was in this interview, and then this lady presenter asked her, had this thick book of the last 20 years of the news, and asked her random dates. And then she said, okay, didn't this happen? And then the presenter said, oh, you're wrong, because in the book it says it's the other day. And she says, no, the book is wrong, I'm right. She was so 100% sure she was right, because she always knew, right? And this kind of clairvoyance is kind of, you don't have to think. It's not a thought process, it's just knowing. Yeah. And then the guy behind the screen Googled it and told the presenter the book is wrong. So that you can see that if people can remember every single day of their life, and other people do not remember, that means that information never gets lost. So how information is carried over time is an incredible big question. In biology, in quantum mechanics, in neuroscience, it's a very, very big question. But information never gets lost. But just the thing is, do we have access to that information or not? That's the thing. And for us, same thing, we don't remember, but we can develop a capacity to remember. We just talked about using the mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, for example. If you develop those mental factors to the full extent, and you achieve samatha, right, calm abiding, you start remembering, you get clairvoyance, remember every detail of your life, and then you get a bit deeper, and then past lifetimes again. So that means that information of this and previous lifetimes never is lost. That information is just not, we cannot access that information, that's the thing. But some people can access the information. So that means that information is somewhere there. So where is it then? Then that's a big question. In Buddhism we say it's not mind, it's not matter, it's another form of reality, which we call non-associated composition of factors. David Bohm talks about implicate order, for example, right? Aaron Schrödinger, another famous quantum physicist, he says in his book on What is Life, he says, information is stored in non-locality. So non-locality means it's not matter, right? Same with your example or with your question about lives and entanglement. Entanglement, exactly the same thing. That two subatomic particles who relate with each other in an incredible far distance. The information is faster than light. Yeah, so Einstein's interpretation, nothing can travel faster than light, is off the plate, right? That's very clear. That information goes faster than light. And it's not like what Einstein calls spooky event, because Einstein could not, though he was incredible, brilliant scientist, he could not relate the general relativity and quantum mechanics. David Bohm could do it, and Carlo Rovelli can do it as well. Yeah, so that means that also Sean Carroll, another kind of famous quantum physicist in the field of quantum gravity as well, he says if you have entanglement, what most scientists forget to explain is what's happening between the two particles, right? Because it's always happening, yeah. So that means everything is interconnected, and information goes. Is not, according to Aaron Schrödinger, information is not local. So if it's not local, it doesn't need a material to function. So it can go much faster than the speed of light, for example. So yeah, there's a few things about information theory. is extremely interesting, but very much debated. Yeah, there's a very interesting theory of integrated information theory, as you probably know, in neuroscience. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, but yeah, that's not a topic for today. Yeah. Which one? Which one was that? I mentioned a few. I mentioned David Bohm, Robert Schrödinger, Carlo Rovelli. Rovelli, yeah. If you're interested in the quantum mechanics, he wrote a very interesting book. I wrote many books. I mean, his books are translated in 40 languages, right? He's a very, very well-respected scientist. He's very busy now. But his book on Helgoland is very good. Helgoland. Helgoland is one island in the north of the UK, where I think one of the quantum physicists of the past had hay fever, and he went there to contemplate quantum mechanics. I forgot who it was. But yeah, that's the name of the book, Helgoland. It's named after that island. Yeah. So in Helgoland, Carlo Rovelli summarizes, of course, the history of physics all the way up to the present findings. And then he comes to his theory of relations, right? Which is very, very similar to Arya Nagarjuna's form of dependent origination. Also in the chapter 5 of the same book, he talks about Casa. Yes, probably a sign we have to stop. He talks about that when he read Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, he said it made a very profound impression on him. The way reality has been described. And then when we had a dialogue, then same thing. He's what I said before. He really interested in the Buddhist interpretation of dependent origination and emptiness, things like that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's in that book. Yeah. Then one more question. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Don't say failed, because yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah.
It's that's just you can neither shut down, nor can you prevent it, nor is there anything that you can do other than to just accept defeat, very quietly accept being called stupid and being bullied all the time. Well, then
I mean, you or others, we all a bit stupid, right? We all stupid, basically. We all in the same boat. No. We all, in one way, we're all very stupid because we don't understand reality. And the rewiring can happen or is possible even for the worst cases, right? It's just a matter of time. Yeah, and putting effort. That's very true. It's just a matter of time and effort. And initially, what we just talked about is to first have acceptance, right? We're not all perfect human beings. We all have qualities, we all have faults. So if you have a kind of acceptance, then first of all, you get less influenced by it. So you can take distance. And then when you have distance, you look at things in a much clearer perspective. It's exactly the same with people who deal with very intense forms of trauma, right? The same procedure seems to work. That they talk with people who have similar issues, they open up, they have the acceptance, and that is the first step in living with it initially, right? If you have that acceptance and you have the distance from it, then the mind becomes clearer about the situation and the issue, right? And then also you should know that there's no instant kind of medicine or chip in your brain or whatsoever. It's just a matter of fact of time. And initially you have to live with it for some time and then accept it and then work on it. Because there's so many other people who have very similar issues, right? Some people say, I'm bipolar, I have this, I have that. But in one way, we all have those aspects. It's just a bit more present in one than a bit less present in the other. But we all have these aspects, right? So that's kind of an aspect to see that is a kind of part of life and try to accept it initially and then walk with it, because then the mind is more open towards it. And then use the techniques we just discussed with alertness and mindfulness, and for sure there will be a change. There's no person who cannot rewire the brain, because that's the nature of reality, that you can rewire the brain if you put some effort and to go in a particular direction. For sure everybody can to a certain extent change, right? Yeah, it's just a matter of fact, I'm putting some effort, okay? Yeah. Okay, so then, yeah, one more and then we stop. Oh, yeah, I can't see anymore, so. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you also, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Which is really there.
Yeah.
Putting it back to other than the Buddha, the mind continuum is along with the imprint of the karma.
Mm-hmm.
The karmic imprint takes place.
Yeah.
So the mind is non-material.
Yeah.
Whereas the karmic imprint,
Yeah.
particularly the physical and the vocal level, is material.
Depends. I mean,
Okay.
karmic, the
So how
actions.
does that
Yeah.
imprinting take place?
Yeah. So there's a few things here happening, right? There's an action which can be physical or verbal, right? But that action comes to an end. So when I say hello, then that saying hello comes to an end, right?
Yeah.
When that hello comes to an end, there's a disintegration happening of the last moment.
Sure.
The last moment of disintegration of that saying hello is not form anymore, is not the voice itself, but it's information. And that last moment that is disintegrated, we call that the term in the philosophy of the Prasangika, we call it disintegratedness, or in Tibetan, Shikpa. Yeah? So according to Lama Tsongkhapa's interpretation, that's an impermanent phenomena. It's not matter and it's not mind. It's what we call a non-associated compositional factor. It's an impermanent phenomena, but it's not matter and it's not consciousness. So that means it's information, and that's very similar to what David Bohm implies with its implicate order, or Aaron Schrödinger with information in non-local space. So this kind of non-associated compositional factor, compositional factor means it's impermanent. Non-associated mean is not associated with mind and matter, but it's neither of those. But that's an impermanent. That's for us very difficult to comprehend what nature actually is. So that's why sometimes it's interesting if you refer to David Bohm's implicate order, or certain scientists, they refer to the hidden variables, so to say, right? So hidden, because also in Buddhism, we talk about manifest phenomena, slightly hidden, and very hidden phenomena, right? So then these leftover aspects of the disintegrations of activity, either physical, verbal, or mental, when that act comes to an end, there's different interpretations in different schools of Buddhist philosophy, right? According to the Prasangika, the last moment or disintegration of that activity, physical, verbal, or mental, becomes itself the potential. It's not that that activity stops and then there's a seed and the seed is planted somewhere in consciousness. They don't say that. Yeah, they say the last moment by itself, the disintegration of the last moment by itself, is this potential. And that's just very aligned, if you take that into account, it's very much aligned with information theory in the various fields of science. That information is kind of a hidden variable, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we call it a hidden phenomenon. It's not manifest. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it, and it's very difficult to comprehend it, even with a thought consciousness or analyzing it. So, according to the most interpretations of most scholars, they say it's kind of this disintegratedness of a particular act, right? When we talk about karma, that by itself is its potential. And that is kind of a non-associated compositional factor. So if it's a non-associated compositional factor, it's not form, it's not matter. And that proves also why we have so many imprints in our connected with our continuity of consciousness, which is just this kind of information. And that causes, when it meets a condition, then it comes to a result, right? So that's in one way karma, if you really, because often when we study karma in the Buddhist way of thinking, we often, especially in the Lamrim traditions, for example, we mainly study karma from the point of view of the Abhidharma philosophy, right? But if you do not study the middle way schools, then you miss out quite a bit. Because in the middle way schools, in particular the Prasangika school, is a very interesting interpretation of karma, right? And particularly around this Shikpa or this disintegratedness. And if you look at those aspects of the interpretation of karma, is very much aligned with many forms of science, in particular the information theory. In biology, when I had a dialogue with Rupert Sredrak, for example, in biology, very, very similar. Or with Carter Raleigh about how information is carried over time in quantum mechanics, or in neuroscience, same thing. So that in one way, the teachings on karma has been explained in the Prasangika school of Buddhist philosophy is very much aligned with information theory in science.
The act in getting disintegrated,
Yeah.
I think that's quite easily understandable because that act is impermanent, so it has to happen.
Yeah, it has to stop, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But disintegratedness becoming information.
Yeah.
And getting
it's not becoming information, it's information by itself. The moment it disintegrates. In a similar way, very simple example, if you look, before the light went off, you looked at the altar, right?
Yeah.
And then you close your eyes, you can remember exactly, more or less, how the altar looked like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
So memory in neuroscience is very difficult.
Okay.
To explain. But actually, from a Buddhist perspective, we say, having seen something, the last moment you saw, whatever you saw, right, in this case the altar, that disintegrates. That disintegration of the last moment by itself is information.
Yeah.
If you then try to remember it, you can recall it because the information is there. Or people can remember every single day of their life, certain people, right? So that means that that information is present. If you trigger it, you can remember it. Yeah.
Get the point.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we in Buddhism say that information never gets lost. And then you can really explain karma in a very scientific way. Yeah.
You talked about the local and the non-local,
Yeah.
the mind.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't find that any teacher is really talking the mind.
Yeah.
I think I have seen, like in your case, also when you talked about the mind, your fingers always went here. And
Or sometimes
like
here.
His
Yeah.
Holiness always bringing it here.
Yeah.
So different teacher.
Yeah.
Where is as per the Buddhist
Yeah.
perspective?
So as Westerner, we say here. As Buddhist, we say here. So why is that so? Because in the scientific world, most people think the brain is there and consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, nothing else. So we say here. But in Buddhism, we say here. Why? Because the most subtle state of mind, which is generally speaking non-local, is in a non-duality with the most subtle energy, which is local.
Yeah.
And that's here. That's why we do it like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
A quick question on
Yeah.
the previous answer.
yeah.
What's the difference between the
Hello?
Yeah.
The voice. Hello, yeah. If the Buddha says it or how the Buddha perceives it? If he says hello, then many beings will benefit much more than I say hello. Because it's more blessing there is, it's dead. The internet is dead. Disintegrated completely. There's no information left.
2 hours, 23 minutes.
Yeah, okay, it's okay. So yeah, joking aside,